All right, you are live.
Okay. Well, I call this Area Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. It is Tuesday, June 24th, and it looks like it's like 6:03, 6:04 p.m. Can we get a roll call of members, please?
Andy Bailey is absent. Grant Muller,
Here.
Stacy Pettigo,
Here.
Scott Hesensberger,
Here.
Chester Banks.
Here.
And staff Liz Stitzel and Kat Bell are present, as well as attorney Jay Moore.
Okay, going to our next item. You guys all get a chance to look at the old minutes. Can I entertain a motion if you guys don't have any issues?
Motion to approve the minutes as presented. Second.
Chester and Scott.
Roll call, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hesensberger,
Yes.
Chester Banks.
Yes.
Minutes approved 4-0.
Okay, looks like we have no old business, so we'll move on to our public hearings for the night. Our first one is application CC-2025-00427, docket number 12-25-SE. Can you please take us through that staff report?
Ask them to give a description of what they're going to do. Best if they would think some sort of long, 20 hours or something.
Sorry, were you ready for me to?
Yes, whenever you get
I
a chance.
apologize.
No, you're
I was
fine.
I was
That's
bothering.
all right. I'll forgive you.
I have a sense that I'm supposed to be doing something. All right, so this is the application of David and Andrea Baird? Okay. At 401 East Franklin Street in Colfax, Indiana. This is a request for a special exception for an accessory apartment and an accessory structure. That's use 3.10. And we've seen a number of these lately. Well, this one is in a town. I'm always excited to see these because I think these fit very well with our farmland preservation and not chewing up more home site area while still providing for more households to be able to live in the community. So this particular petition site consists of 2 combined residential lots. So they're 2 tax parcels, but they're a single building lot for planning purposes. And there's a house already on the site, and the petitioners would like to place a accessory structure on the same site to provide living space for themselves. And then their plan is for their son and his family to live in the primary dwelling. In order to have both the house and the accessory apartment, the special exception approval is needed. This is on the southeast corner of the town of Colfax, and it's completely surrounded by R3 medium density residential. And I believe the water treatment plant is actually right behind this if you're familiar with Colfax. So there's a picture there on the second page. Yep, you can see the water facility there right behind the other side of the fence. But you can see kind of this house, and it's got a nice double lot there. The applicants are seeking special exception approval. There's 6 findings that need to be found positively for that, and there's also some specific standards for accessory apartments. So the first finding is that the proposed use conforms to the district provisions in which it will be located and all the general regulations of the ordinance. So first of all, this is a special exception in the R3 district. There's 8 supplemental standards, that there can be a maximum of only 1 accessory apartment with a single family dwelling unit. In this case, the standard is met. 2, that the accessory apartment be clearly secondary and incidental to the principal dwelling unit, and that it, if you're modifying an existing structure, it needs to be compatible. So in this case, it's going to be, I believe, a new structure, because I haven't talked to you guys. And we look at secondary as a square footage measurement, because I don't know how else you'd do it. And so they're going to be bringing in, I believe, a pole. Is it a pole building type structure, or is it a?
It's a clear span,
Okay.
yeah.
And I don't have it on here, but what's your square footage, Jay? That's what Jay was asking me about. What's your square footage on your new structure?
I think
It's
around
gonna be a 24 by 36, so I think it's 854.
I can measure that. And what's the square footage on your house?
1300.
Yeah. So that'll answer
Okay,
your question. That was what delayed me. Is the house is 1300, but house. And then you said, what were the dimensions on the pole building?
24 by 36.
4 times 36, 864.
Yeah.
64, I was off by 10.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, so answer that question at the same time. The third standard is that the apartment can be either an attached structure or attached and within. In this case, it will be detached, and it will be on a masonry block foundation, which is necessary to meet residential code.
I had a question. We're actually gonna have a concrete pad. Does that qualify, or does it need to be masonry block?
So for the recording, they asked, they said they were hoping to have a concrete pad. Does that qualify or does it need to be masonry block? So it cannot be a monolithic pour, which is commonly what people refer to as a pad, where your foundation and your slab are all one thing. That cannot be used for either larger storage buildings or anything residential. So if you're not using block, you're probably gonna be into some kind of concrete custom pour, but it has to be separate from your pad. We can put you in touch with the building inspector when you talk about that, but it has to meet code, and I know monolithic pours do not meet code for residential use.
Okay.
So you can't do all one slab and edge and then build on top of it
Okay.
for living in it. So, most people just do the masonry block, but I think there is some engineering where you can do separate solid poured, like basement walls are poured, you know, kind of style, and then you put your slab in the middle.
Would have to be incorporated in the concrete so it's below the freeze line?
Yeah, your
That would
slab
be-
can't physically like
Yeah.
attach in, and then you actually have to have insulation placed for residential structures
Right.
between
Yeah.
your foundation wall and your slab, which is, so, but if you've got code questions on design, we can put you in touch with them.
Okay, okay,
So,
thank you.
alright. So at any rate, it will have to meet building code.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it was masonry block, but they do understand.
Monolithic?
What'd you say?
Monolithic?
You cannot do a monolithic pour for a residential structure.
It can't be a slab without
Separation.
separation of the wall support system.
So monolithics are where everything is dug, the footers, the foundation, and the slab all in one, and they pour it all. You can't do that on larger accessory structures. I forget the square footage limit, it's not very big. 721 is the square footage at which, even for a storage structure, you can't use a monolithic pour. But anything residential, regardless of square footage, cannot be on a monolithic pour. So if you're gonna live in it, it takes that out. But we run into that question a lot, totally not on the staff report topic, but with people building barns and stuff, because they like the idea, but then if they get very big at all, you know, then they can't do it. So it's not an uncommon thing for our inspectors to see and tag. I'd rather you ask before you got into it,
Yes,
so.
yes.
All right, so moving on, the owner of the property must reside in either the dwelling or the apartment. In this case, they plan to reside in the apartment. That there's no exterior stairways to an upper level, this is not applicable in this case. 6, that if it's in the principal dwelling, there has to be interior access, again, not applicable in this case. 7 is that all applicable building code and health department standards shall be met. The applicant does understand and, you know, reflect on the conversation we just had, that they need to meet residential code. The town of Colfax supplies sewer to this, so a septic is not required, and they have no objection to the additional apartment. And finally, that additional parking has to be provided off-street, and there is enough space here for the 2 required spots for the house and 2 for the apartment. The second finding is that the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to other property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So the town clerk had no issue with the added unit on the existing sewer system. This apartment will come off the same line and tap that serves the house, which we commonly want to see that with accessory apartments, so that they can't just be split off. But in Colfax, it's an additional odd concern, because they have some challenges right now with their sewer system, so they can't create new taps very easily. So there's a second reason why in Colfax it's got to come off the same tap. There's no other issues that the petition would appear to create that would be harmful. 3, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so that the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties do not impair health, safety, or comfort, and do not adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So this is an attractively maintained property. It should complement nearby homes, as well as the home is accessory too. The new structure will be smaller and appear as an accessory structure, and there's a lot of properties around Colfax that do have accessory structures, including 2 I can think of that we've approved accessory apartments for in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. 4, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect consistent with not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. And this will be an accessory structure required to meet setbacks. It should have the same appearance as other similar structures nearby, and it's actually back to back with the water plant, which has a large pole barn there too. So 5, the proposed use shall organize vehicular access and parking to minimize conflicting traffic movement on adjacent streets. There's plenty of room here for parking, no concerns on streets or conflicting traffic. And finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So the 2012 comprehensive plan land use goal 2 says to promote the development of residential areas with high quality housing in a variety of types, styles, and densities. And accessory apartments subject to board approval definitely support that goal. So consequently, staff recommends to approve the special exception request. And then I would note that we do have a letter of support from the town of Colfax from their meeting on May 20th of 2025, where Ms. Baird showed floor plans for the 24 by 36 unit. And I was actually present at that meeting too, but it just details how they made their motions, but the town is supportive of approving the petition. And there was no one at that meeting who objected or even had any questions about it other than town board members and myself, so.
Okay. Do you guys have anything to add to that? Okay. Is there anybody else here that'd like to say anything? Okay, I'll open up to board discussion.
Looks pretty easy.
I would say it
to
looks
me.
pretty straightforward to me.
Yep, yep. You ready for it?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, Chester.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to approve application number CC-2025-00427, docket number 1225 SE, according to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference.
I'll
And I don't
second.
think- And I don't think there's any conditions to go along with that either.
No. I'll second. Chester moved, Grant seconded. Roll call vote when you get a chance, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hetzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Banks.
Yes.
All right, so you're approved, so your next step will be to just continue working with Kat and staff to get everything you need together for permits.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to our next public hearing, which is application CC or dash 2025-00453, docket number 13-25-VA. This is for New Hall and Rossville. When you get a chance, can you take us through that, please?
Yeah, so as you noted, this is the application of New Holland Rossville. They're requesting a variance to partially waive required buffer yards along the south and west property lines. This is zoned A1 as is everything around it. I noted a little bit in the staff report, but we'll note this is a little bit confusing because it's an existing site. And buffer yards are usually required on all sides. But for existing sites that kick in their buffer yard requirements because of the degree of expansion, which in the case of New Holland, they built a whole new primary structure, so that kicked that in. We can administratively waive up to 50% of the requirement if there's physical obstructions that prevent installing it, such as a parking lot or a building. So we had already done that before we got to this. So that's why it's kind of a little bit weird the way it looks compared to what you usually see when you see a buffer yard discussion. So this site is on the northwest corner of West State Road 26 and 330 West in Ross Township. There's 2 residences to the immediate west and 1 directly to the south. It's about a half-mile east of Rossville's urban growth boundary. And then to the north and the east you have open fields sitting there. The site has a farm equipment sales business, which has been there for some time, but previously when they expanded, came for a special exception because they needed that in order to make the expansion as a special exception use. And they recently completed construction on a really nice new building for the business operations, and they removed the former building that had been built in 1972. So as part of that previous special exception approval, it was noted the project needed to meet all other standards in the current ordinance. No variances were issued with that. And those standards included, but weren't only limited to, the required buffer yards. So the applicant just somehow didn't quite track going through. They were more worried about the building and the stuff going on, didn't realize what the screening and landscaping requirements were going to be. Thus, they didn't have that conversation up front. As I mentioned, staff can administratively waive up to 50% if there's obstructions, and we did that with the north and east sides, because on the east, it's pretty much all gravel going out. There's literally virtually no grass that's on their property. And then to the north, there's gravel for the parking lot and a really close fence, and then there's an existing building which is staying that sits right up against the property line. And so then you get over to the back and you've got a drainage area back there, actually, although you can't see that on the flyover necessarily, but there's one there. So we saw there were practical issues there right away to waive that 50%. So then we got into the west and the south property lines. The applicant has a existing sales area that sits kind of to the front, and he initially was hoping to avoid the variance and had asked if he could just leave like a 400-foot gap and put landscaping up against the building, but the problem was we'd already waived past, like, to the 50%, so when we tried to make that additional waiver, we were clearly beyond that 50% and what we could do without coming to the board. So consequently, we let him know a variance was the only option, and they decided that they wanted to ask for a variance of everything except a little bit of the west side. So the end request is that the petitioner is wanting to eliminate all of the northeast and south side from having buffer yards, and then just have part of the rear of the west side have some buffer yard area. And there's a site plan that's kind of in there on the second page that kind of shows that, where they've kind of drawn in where their new building is. It's hard, it's just so recent that the flyovers don't really show where things are at anymore. But they show that, they'd want to put the trees back by the pond area behind. It's labeled solar field. It's 2 solar panels that are there for anyone familiar with the site, lest that be confused with something large and industrial solar. But they do sit close to the property line, which when those were permitted, that wasn't a big enough improvement to kick in the buffer yards, so they were allowed to put them at the same setback as any other accessory structure would go. In terms of analysis, there's 3 findings that need to be found positively in order to grant a variance. First, the approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. So not meeting the full amount of plantings on all 4 sides would not seem to be injurious to the general health of the community, but staff does feel that a complete 100% lack of meeting the required plantings along the entire front and the front portion of the west side is injurious to the general morals of the community and the goals countywide that we have to gradually bring older sites up to current standards when major improvements are made. I could list a whole line of companies, both in the industrial park but also outside of it, like Shoup's south of town when they made their expansion, that we've brought closer each time, and usually you don't see major expansions happen every 2 or 3 or 4 years. If you don't work with that when you're there, you might be 50 or 100 years before you have another event that kicks in the ability to have that conversation. So given there's residences in the immediate vicinity, and this is very close to Rossville, with a strong possibility of development in the near future, Rossville does have developers looking at their east side. So, as housing comes out this direction, it's a very visible location, so a complete lack of plantings along the entire front and southwest corner would appear to convey a message that maybe there's not a respect towards those existing homes and Rossville's most viable growth area. However, staff also feels that a partial variance to allow less landscaping would still bring the site closer to compliance as the ordinance intends, but not have the same detrimental effect overall. And the petitioner notes there will be some landscaping along the building, but that may not be readily seen, especially if they have an entire display area in between the building and the front. So staff feels that maybe looking at a variance for the display area, but not everything all the way across, and probably a variance for where the solar panels are, because I think if you tried to fit a tree there, you'd be either on the neighbor's property or you'd actually be defeating the whole purpose of having solar panels, because you'd be shading them, which is obviously not going to help them produce electricity. So the second finding is that the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So again, very similar. Staff feels that a complete variance along the front and the southwest corner would be adverse, but to work out something less for a partial would still be able to meet the spirit of the requirements, even if a variance from the letter has been granted, because as staff we certainly understand why you wouldn't want a bunch of trees in front of where you're displaying your product, and automobile sales and farm sales both have displays of equipment that they need people to be able to see. 3, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. So we as staff couldn't find a practical difficulty for a 100% waiver of nearly all the buffer yards on all 4 sides. We do see a practical difficulty where staff has already waived the requirements, where there's buildings and parking lots, because you'd have to tear out existing infrastructure to try to get anything to grow there. The display area is all grass there in the front, so equipment may not be there year-round when there's extreme weather, but it's understandable that the applicant wouldn't want their sales display area blocked. And I would note, this is a pre-existing use, so there's been a display area there for a long period of time. So it's really not within our scope to discuss, like on a new site, whether their display area should be elevated or moved to a different location or something else. They're not changing what they've done all the way along. So staff does feel there's a practical difficulty to some degree, given the existing display area would become obstructed. But staff would not see a practical difficulty in the remainder of the perimeter along the front once you get outside of, and I've actually got a drawing that the applicant had provided when we were talking administratively that kind of shows having some plantings to the east side on the front and to the west side on the front, but then leaving like a 400-foot open area where the display area is. That entire frontage is about 650 to 700 foot, to give you an idea. So in front of the septic system, you know, and along the road between the solar, there's not really anything there that would prevent a plant from fitting. So we kind of recommended that the board look at the southeast and southwest corners, maybe having some plantings, but leaving the storefront or the display area open for visibility. That would mean that, and this is where it got a little hard to describe, but the north and the east sides would remain administratively waived, which gets you the 50%, and the variance would further waive the south side directly in front of the sales area, which is going to be 350 to 400 foot long, and then the west side directly adjacent to the solar panels, so they're not having to crowd plantings to the north and south. They can just sort of skip that completely and have, you know, appropriate plant amounts. So staff recommends to approve a partial variance on the south. We kind of said from front corner to front corner of the building, but we're not sure, looking at it, that it's not actually from the septic to halfway across the parking lot area, because their drawing originally, when they provided it for the variance, they're asking for a complete waiver. So it's, I'll actually pass down. You can see the original drawing that we were trying to cross-reference. So we're not necessarily saying that the storefront should be what's waived, but then they can't park in the septic area, so only half of it. We were just trying to figure out how to describe it and the mismatch between the drawings. But the recommendation from us would be that that sales area, that 350 to 400 foot, be where the variance is given. The rest in front of the septic. And then on the corner, as you get towards the intersection where INDOT's right away kind of angles, you know, that there be some plantings there. And we don't have to discuss the other 2 sides since they can be administratively waived. So hopefully that's clear as mud. We brought that drawing to try to help it make it a little bit clearer, because I think what staff is supportive of is what the applicant wanted to try to do to avoid the variance, which was just more than what we could grant. But I want to be clear that they're requesting the full waiver except for just behind the solar panels alongside the pond. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there between their request and our recommendation. So I think hopefully that's clear, and we can clarify further if it's not.
Okay. Well, thank you. Does the petitioner have anything to add?
The only thing.
Would you mind going to the microphone, stating your name? Thank you.
Neil Fawcett. I manage the New Holland Rossville store. There's nothing much to add, with exception, she mentioned there's 2 solar panels. I don't know that it matters, but there are actually 5.
Okay.
And it's 190 feet from the fence row, which is roadside, to the northernmost portion of that solar field. But she hit the nail on the head. Ideally, we would like to have nothing as far as landscape roadside or the south, and then be able to plant that buffer zone back behind the solar panels, between essentially the northernmost side of the solar panels, between the pond and the fence. There's 10 feet of space there that we could plant stuff.
Okay.
So as staff, if there's 5, like, our recommendation is still the same, not to require them adjacent to the solar panels, but in front of and behind along
This
the
is the
property line.
southeast corner we're talking about, right?
Neil, have you seen this?
Yeah, this is the southeast corner. You can actually see the solar panels
Probably
back
some
there
point
on
in
the,
time.
the west line.
Is that something
In the
that you're
background.
agreeable to?
Except you wouldn't have the same density of plantings as what you drew on that, because you were drawing a density of plantings that incorporated the entire frontage. With the variance, you would actually reduce your plantings by the amount that the variance was granted, so you would actually have fewer trees than what your drawing shows.
Yep.
They would be distributed that way, though.
The most important piece is what she already stated, just making sure that whatever we plant is clear of those solar panels. We don't want something to grow and shade those.
Yeah.
So,
No, from my point of view, I mean, obviously, if you're agriculture, sales, and equipment, I mean, you can't be having stuff out front. I mean, that's where they sit stuff, and I mean, that's how they sell equipment. And to his point, I do think the solar, I mean, that'd be kind of defeat the purpose if you've got trees growing over the solar panels. But yeah, from my point, I mean, to hit everything we need to, and then to also help them as a business, I mean, that drawing.
and currently, there is no equipment displayed on that front lawn. I planted grass on May the 10th. It's
Yeah.
coming up now. Probably not gonna put anything on it until late fall
Are you
next year.
talking about right here then, in this area? Up in here?
Yeah, this is where their sales area was previously, so it's, we tried to measure it with him and I beforehand, and it's somewhere between 350 and 400 foot long by the time you get to the,
So on this picture though, I don't think I've ever seen equipment sitting out in here.
no, this is the NDOT right away right here, so it doesn't sit down here. They don't own this.
Yeah, but
Everything I have displayed will be inset that fence.
So these trees, that he has, you can't see the edge of it, but he has some trees here on the corner. So
Yep.
there'd be some plantings that would go right here on this edge. But then I'm gonna guess about where those signs are is where the plantings would then quit. And it would be open then until you get down to the septic field.
but you're not setting equipment up in here, right?
Yeah.
In the grass area?
Yeah, we will. Mhm.
Yeah, that's where.
Yeah, that's where
That's where
it's
it has
always
been
been.
traditionally, yeah.
That's where the old Case dealership. That's where they've always set equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to helping out with it, but I think it should be noted that, you know, even John Deere did a pretty nice landscaping job on 31, you know, in front of their building. And, you know, I'm not inclined to just let everything like that go, I guess.
They do have landscape here in front of the building.
Yeah, they are proposing to add some non-ordinance required landscaping along the front of the building, kind of in trade out.
That is in play and it will be happening. When I planted, I left like a 3 or 4 foot strip. And we'll put landscaping and landscaping rock down there to dress that up. Can it really be visibly seen from the road? Probably not at 60 mile an hour. You're not gonna see.
I think with the length of the building, it's gonna have a softening effect, even if someone's not seeing the individual tree, but,
You guys
Okay.
have any other comments or questions?
As long as he has agreement with this, plan, that looks fine with me.
the only thing I would note, if you're gonna base it off his original plan, is that I would make sure we note for the record that with the variance, he will be able to reduce those plantings. We'll measure the remaining space outside of what the variance is and recalculate that, because he was trying to cluster, but still the total amount, so he'll be down, you know, I'm gonna guess 500 to 600 foot that he then won't have to do with the variance, so then we'll recalculate the plants. Unless you want him to put in more plants, in which case you could require that. But once a variance is granted, then I don't have to make him do math with those areas.
So is that different than the conditions that are referenced in this recommendation?
I think the conditions suited, I just want to make sure that if you make a motion, if you just say tied into the drawing, well, the drawing shows more plantings than what the ordinance would require with the variance.
I would also say that the diagram that Matt drew up that you guys are holding right there is not indicative of what we're asking for here on this right here. So, I mean, there's gonna have to be some agreement as to between that and
Well, I think
this.
that's the
I just want it to be
conversation. I
clear.
was very upfront with Matt that I didn't support a 100% variance, and he wanted to ask for it, and that's fine. But in terms of a practical difficulty, there's not the same physical obstruction, so that's why there's a difference. He wanted to ask for it anyway and see, you know, where the conversation went. And, I was pretty upfront with the fact that it in front of the sales area and by the solar, it totally makes sense, but completely waiving, like if it was a new business, you would have to have landscaping around the signs, around the, you know, the front on both sides, it wouldn't be a complete waiver of everything. So needing to have something, and his original drawing, you know, if it would have avoided the variance, that would be where we would have ended up. Like, it's just that it was more than, the ordinance only gave me 50%, and we were getting to 70-some percent. So I was, when staff differs, we try to be upfront, so we don't startle somebody like when we come in. But that's why there's a difference. So that's what the conversation is they can grant less than what's asked for, they can't grant more. So they definitely could grant what's been asked for, or they can grant, like with the staff report recommendation, something that is more like this original plan, other than I wanted to make sure they didn't think it would be the same density of trees unless they specify it.
You know, I think the hard part for a board like us to do is to be asked to approve these types of things when we really don't have anything visually to understand what we're doing, right? I don't see a before and after.
No, this one is hard because there's not a flyover and they didn't
Yeah.
engage an engineer to actually draw out a full landscaping
Yeah,
plan.
exactly. It seems like there
So
should be a landscaping plan
That's
within
why you have a
code.
somewhat, Kat and I wrestled with how to describe that,
Yeah.
you know, in our findings too.
Yeah, I would
Which is
agree.
why we brought the picture, because we were like, this is, you know, staff has no issue with the display area receiving the variance there between the septic and roughly halfway across that parking lot near where that signage is, or next to the solar, but
Would it help you guys if I got drone footage of what the actual site looks like now?
the site has zero landscaping now. It's completely non-compliant.
Yeah.
With everything that's been adopted since '93. But I would also note, I shouldn't use non-compliant, it's legal non-conforming. The site began in '76. So we don't retroactively go back unless you have a new principal structure, you have a value increase of more than a certain amount, or you add parking. There's a set of things that if you do, then your buffer yard requirements kick in. And then staff has that freedom to waive up to 50%, which usually gets us there with existing sites, but
So,
this one it didn't.
so Liz, I like the diagram, and I'd like to kind of incorporate it in the conditions. I understand that it might not be quite as dense, and you're saying that on the east and the west side of the south line, is that right?
On both the,
Behind the solar panels.
on both the west side and the south side, it would be a little less dense, because what happened in this drawing is we measured out, the total linear footage of the south property line, and the west property line, and there's a certain number of trees you have to have per 100 linear foot, and then he just kind of clustered them. But with the variance, then there'll be, that distance across the display area, which I can go out and physically measure after the variance if I need to, but it's right about, I would say it's right about 400 foot by the time you get from the signs to the septic field.
Probably.
I think it's real close.
So the north of the solar panels on the west side
To the property line
to the north property line,
would need to get it.
there's no reason you can't plant anything there.
Correct. And
And
south
then-
of the solar panels there on the corner, on the south property line, there's nothing to prevent some kind of plantings from going in
It's far
there.
enough away, it's not gonna affect his solar panels.
Yeah, and he can choose his plantings. We don't tell him he has to put in a 100-foot tall oak tree.
Right.
Now, he can't put in a 5-foot tall Japanese maple.
What
like-
did we specify?
So the ordinance just kind of has a minimum size at planting, and then it tells you how many evergreen, how many deciduous, like shade trees, and how many, but, what we generally do administratively, because the ordinance talks about deciduous shade trees versus ornamental trees. So a deciduous shade tree, the way we've always interpreted that, when you look at the recommended species, they range from maybe 15, 20-foot tall, all the way up to 100-foot tall. And we don't have anything in our ordinance that tells the applicant which one they have to pick. Even, we have a handful of tree species that we strongly discourage. We have on a list that, like elm is one of those. But even those, we don't prohibit them if they wanna put in an elm, but the ordinance requires them to keep it alive. So we usually tell people, we usually encourage administratively companies to pick native species that are gonna survive well with minimum maintenance, because those are gonna be most successful for the company and for us. And then pick things that are appropriate to their site. If they're in a tight site in downtown Rossville, then maybe things in planters and with minimal root invasiveness is better. You know, with this, if you're planting something in front of the south, I would certainly recommend you look at stuff that's a little bit shorter, not 100-foot tall, you know, oaks. But they can pick that mix, and they can also pick, they don't have to plant them like every 5 foot of plant. They can cluster them to some degree. So if you had 200 linear foot, let's just say, and that required 10 plantings in that 200 linear foot, well, they don't have to literally go and plant one every so often. They could pick 3 locations in that 200 foot and cluster those plantings in 3 groups and leave it open in between. A good example of that is Zachary's up here in 28, when they hit a set of improvements needed before my time, but they clustered. So they've got some mounds with clustered trees and they have big open areas. It's a little easier for maintenance. So like that's a location too where they'll still have some discretion in how they arrange those. The only thing I tell people is if I walk out and I find you had 500 foot of plantings required and you've put them all in one corner in a group, I'm gonna turn that down. It needs to be somewhat evenly distributed. It doesn't have to be literally 10 feet a tree, 10 feet a tree, 10 feet a tree. So they can also work a little with that and how they set them.
So do you understand what she's after?
I'm sure you can put it in some type of document that
I
tells
can.
me exactly what is required.
Yeah, and I can,
I would like to avoid putting anything close to those solar panels if possible. I don't know if that's doable.
the front
So-
buffer yard is, they've got 50 foot of depth on that. So they're able to go with the lowest density of planting. I was just gonna go and look that up. It's not a ton of plantings per 100 linear foot. The reason it shows so many here is because they've got 700 foot this way and so many this way, and then they were trying to get out of over half of it, so that ended up with a ton clustered in the corner, but let me,
So can I get this prepared here to say, in the spirit of the picture that you have, and you're gonna approve it anyhow, right?
so there, I believe they were illustration 5. So for every 100 linear foot, they need 1 shade tree that's deciduous, 2 evergreen, and 1 shrub. So that's 4 plantings for every 100 linear foot. So if we're waving, this is roughly, but if we're waving in front of that display area, so if we're roughly 350 to 400 foot, then you're gonna
Let's
have,
call it 400 feet.
let's just say there's 400 foot, so then you're gonna have roughly 300 foot left. So just as an offhand, what's not gonna leave them to distribute between the 2 corners along that property line is gonna be 4 deciduous trees, we took off, so 3 deciduous trees, 6 evergreens, and 3 shrubs. So I don't think it's all that unreasonable when you look at that number of plantings for them to be able to put, let's just say, they can decide which side they go to, but 1 deciduous, a couple evergreen, and a shrub or 2 over here on this corner.
And if they want to
And
have
then
them lower
a
near
couple
the,
over here, and if they've got 200 foot here, they don't have to cluster them all right in front of the solar panels. They could put a few on the corner, a few between the septic and the solar, and a few over here on this corner of the septic and cluster them. And there's nothing that prohibits that, unless they just want to go and evenly divide that. So 4 plantings for every 100 linear feet is not actually a ton. What happened here was he still had to have all the plantings for the 400 foot in the middle. So that's why you see like 10 evergreens right in front of the solar. That's because he had to put them somewhere still on that line, and that was all that was left. So the variance will reduce the number of plantings. They should be able to choose where they set those so that their solar panels are not sitting in shade between their tree species and their location selection.
I was gonna say, if they can pick shrubs and stuff, I mean, they're gonna have to, I mean,
they can figure out where they want them.
so,
Yeah.
I mean,
And you said you were gonna reduce it because they were gonna landscape in front of the building somewhat too?
Well, if you give a variance, I would recommend that you put a condition they've got to put that building landscaping in, you know, as a trade-off, but, but no, that reduction is happening because when you give the variance, then it's as if you grant them a partial variance from that, let's just say 400 linear foot there of that front property line, well then, from a purpose of calculating trees, it's as if that no longer exists. They don't have to put in that 4 shade trees, 8 evergreens, and 4 deciduous shrubs, those just vanish. And we only use the remaining frontage to calculate what they have to put in, and then those get spaced in those spaces.
Is that what you want?
I'm okay with that, yes. I'm, you know, when they request a variance, unless you guys want them to put in more density, but I'm just after getting them to be closer to what a new site would need to be. I don't see any reason to make them be more dense than what they otherwise would need to be. I understand they've got an existing display area.
I'd like to hear Nathan say he agrees to that.
You guys tell me what you need. I mean, I want to comply. I want it to look nice. The building landscape, it looks incredible compared to what we
It does. It
what
looks-
we
it
used to
looks a
have.
lot better.
I mean,
Yeah.
the building landscaping is 100% on variance or not. That is happening. We don't need to negotiate that at all. That's going to happen. So you guys tell me what you need, how you want it done, within what you guys decide, and we'll do whatever.
I had,
I was gonna say, I think
I
it-
don't feel like I know
I couldn't
enough
see where it went.
to make a decision one way or the other, is my opinion.
But with no landscaping there already, what's a drone gonna do different?
Yeah,
A picture.
Yeah.
you're just gonna see no landscaping.
That's
and
what I mean. Because I agree with you, but that's getting a drone, an aerial view when there's nothing there,
Well, and you're also putting it off a month.
and you're putting it off a month.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't request a
Yeah.
drone. It just, I keep going back to this thing, you know, when we're talking about commercial properties of this size, it's very hard to visualize what we're doing. And what, you're asking us to make a variance that, you know, I don't sit here and feel comfortable enough to know that I'm making a right decision.
That's fair.
And
With the new site, we would have required a full engineered landscaping plan. We just don't usually
Yeah.
do that up front with existing sites that are retrofitting.
So I've seen that site enough that I'm pretty comfortable in making a recommendation of some sort. I'd like to have some language to tie it down.
I'm
Well,
working
I think if you
Yeah.
say it's 400, you're granting a variance
Yeah.
that
I have a better idea maybe, but you gotta give me a moment here. I'm trying to see if I could write this in a way that's linguistically clear.
gonna say, I went by it.
I'll be glad to give you some moments to do that.
I just went by it today.
Yeah, right.
I go by it almost every day. And it's been like that for years. And
You want to certainly,
I
you
can't
know,
get a, do you
I want
know
to be
if
as practical as possible. I understand that's a display area for equipment. And I want to see you out there with the equipment and giving it display. It's a great way to sell your equipment and advertise it.
solar fields are, how long?
I understand the solar panels, you don't want to impede
Oh,
them.
wait, maybe it came out.
I appreciate that you want to landscape the building. I think that'll make it look really fantastic too.
well, I think one thing they've spent all this money on the building. Why wouldn't they?
Right.
Why wouldn't they do the finishing touches to make it look nice?
Right.
I mean, that's just my opinion.
because we spent all the money.
Yeah, but we
Now
gotta
broke.
we gotta put a little faith in the people that. I mean,
Right.
Did you have a question, Liz, in regard to the solar panels that I may or may not be
I'm
able to
working
answer?
on trying to work it out here on the flyover, but I was trying to figure out the length from front corner of front panel to back corner of back panel. It looks like it's,
It's 190 feet. I measured it before I came.
oh, you're amazing.
I wanted to know
that's
that
what I
myself,
needed.
so I made some notes before I came.
Nope, that's super helpful.
From the fence to the northernmost.
362. Some math, and then some more math, and then I'll have something for you guys. I just decided it might be simpler to do this by number of plantings. That leaves 172, which then okay, so
One more of those two parts to it.
I think it takes a moment longer maybe to make the motion, but what might be clearer, if somebody has to figure it out later, is to basically divide this up by side and say, having done the math, you've got 172 foot left on that, it's not adjacent to the solar panels on that west side. So that would require 2 shade trees, 4 evergreens and 1 shrub would be your plantings. And, you know, I would expect to maybe see at least one of those, you know, to the front side, because there's a little bit there. And then the rest kind of distributed along that back property line in a way that's aesthetically pleasing. And then to the front, if you look at the south, and I can pass this down so you can see my notes, but if you look to the southeast corner, I'd look at 1 shade tree, 2 evergreens, and 1 shrub on the southeast corner there along that front property line, however they want to put them, between the signs and the, you know, on their property, not on NDOT's.
Right.
And then that leaves between the east corner of the septic field and the property line, to the west, they would need to have 2 shade trees, 4 evergreens, and 2 shrubs. In that, that should be roughly 200 linear foot there. And then again, like, they can figure out how to, I say evenly distribute, I don't necessarily mean they need to count an even number of feet. They could cluster them, but I would expect that I wouldn't walk out and find those have all been smashed together in one little spot and too close, you know. I would think in 200 linear foot, I would see 2 or 3 groupings, you know, of plants. We do, it's not required, but we usually do recommend that you not put a shrub by itself. They are usually easier to keep alive if they're near some trees for mowing. But I'll, let me just make a note as to what's what property line. I'll just pass this down and maybe this will help.
I think we, like I kind of said earlier, we gotta have a little faith in our neighbors and our business owners that they're gonna do the right thing too. I mean, I understand it's a business and some people have broken the rules, bunched them all together because they got by, but
Yeah, I don't think you need necessarily
No.
put all that in your motion.
No, I mean-
just, your other alternative, if you don't wanna try to do it by number of plantings, would be to try to somehow specify that area without a landscaping plan. That's where you kinda get back to Scott, where it's like,
Yeah.
you almost need them to prepare a document and bring it back and tie it into that, because their previous drawing nor the one they submitted are exactly what we're discussing.
No, and I
It would seem to me that there is a way to put smaller landscaping up there in that area that doesn't impact equipment
Well,
viewing.
small, oh, you're talking about in front of the equipment
Yeah,
sales area?
exactly.
There
Yeah.
might be, yeah.
I mean, there's, you know,
you
this
work
is
with
big
it.
equipment and it's,
So-
you know, we don't need, like you said, there's doesn't have to be 60-foot trees or a row of shrubs, but there is appropriate ways to landscape an area that still visually is appealing to it, right, with the equipment sitting there.
Yeah, I've certainly seen car dealerships and John Deere, and I can actually think of a sale, and farm equipment sales up in Lafayette that has landscaping.
Yeah, I mean, John Deere's not only got shrubs all the way down, they got trees behind the shrubs
Yeah.
with all their equipment sitting on the other side, you know?
Again, what I'm after is hearing Nathan say,
Neil,
I'll
Neil.
do it. Neil,
Neil.
excuse me.
We're just gonna name you.
I've been called
different-
worse.
I want to hear Neil say, yep, that's something.
Well,
that
I
we
would
can
agree,
accomplish.
if they will not agree to whatever the settlement is, then your only option would be to deny
That's
if you
right.
weren't
That's-
pleased with
My
their-
biggest ask is that we have a clear directive from you guys
Yeah.
that says this is what we're requiring from you. These are the areas. This is what we want to see, and this is how we want it done. You give me that, I'll make it happen. I'm not here to get crossways.
Yes, I mean,
Is that clear enough?
when you have
Well,
a,
here, I'll show him.
I don't
Let me
know what
see
a
if
clear
that's-
directive without a plan is.
well, would they have,
If you want a clear directive, in my mind, meet the code.
Well, on the other hand, it seems to me that basically what we're saying is
This is what I.
they can pick
showed
the
them
400
different
feet that
based
they
on
don't
just spaces.
have to
Is
meet,
One
and
shade tree,
everywhere
one tree,
else,
And one shrub up in this. corner. And
they can then
2 shade
design
trees,
how
4
they
evergreen, 2
want
shrubs between this corner of the septic and that
and
property
put the
line.
appropriate number of
clustered or
plantings in.
grouped, However, like, I guess I would kind of picture in my head, maybe.
And they
there's
can
a grouping
decide
at the
where
corner,
the
maybe
400
something kind of
feet
in here,
is.
Well,
maybe
one
something
thing-
kind of in here, and then
I mean,
leave
before
just
even
open
New
spaces
Holland
in
took it on, I
between.
mean, it was case.
Yeah.
I mean,
And then
so
back
it was
here
the
you
exact
have
same thing. So I don't
two
think
shade
it's
trees,
fair,
4 evergreen.
put all the
1
blame,
shrub,
and I
you've got
understand we have to meet
170
code,
foot.
Yeah.
but it's
And
not
again,
all
you
their
kind of
fault
decide
the
how
way
you
it's
wanna-
been
How you
for
want to
40, 50
arrange
years.
those
That's,
in
I mean,
that remaining
case had,
behind the
so
doors. Obviously,
I
it's not
completely
the
understand.
Well, there was
that.
no requirement back then at all.
But that's kind of where I
Exactly.
went with it,
So,
and then your 400
that's-
foot would just be
Yeah.
kind of, I'm gonna.
That's where I'm-
But in
Be in
essence,
there
we have a
between
new
your
facility.
I agree. I understand that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, why would we waive anything?
So
because
I don't know,
of
that's kind of
something
where
that
I'd
was
gotten,
passed,
but-
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what we try to avoid doing.
Yeah,
Neil,
Yes,
are you in agreement with what she proposed?
that's fine.
Okay. All right. How are we gonna word that with the motion here? In agreement with your plan?
Well, you can, it's gonna be a long motion that I don't wanna write. Here, hang on, I have an idea. Give me a moment. Let me draw. And you can probably enter an exhibit. And make it part of the motion and then part of the file. I'm gonna label it exhibit, I can't spell exhibit, J.
EXHIPITS.
Exhibit 1.
That's,
Or-
oh,
oh,
sorry,
not
exhibit,
plural.
alright, should that be an A or a 1? How should I label that?
Whatever you
All
want to
right,
call
Exhibit A,
it.
that's what it is.
It-
Alright, so,
One side gets A, the other side gets, one side gets letters, the other usually gets numerals. When you're in court. We're not in court.
scale. North arrow on here. Down here, we've got State Road 26. You guys are just gonna have to bear with me for a moment. And over here, we've got North County Road 330 West. All right. Parking. Here. New building. Up here, we've got old building, no offense to it. And this is
That's
all
on the outside.
Yeah.
like a driveway space.
It's all right.
Driveway.
It's been a little toasty this week.
It has been a little toasty.
It rained a little bit at Mulberry.
Yeah,
So,
pond,
my wife was talking about,
and roughly.
it was getting dark outside there for a while
halfway
today.
building.
You said it rained in
It
Mulberry?
poured it right over the
Today?
Mulberry branch for a minute. I mean, it's dry now.
Just for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I heard it was,
It got dark. I was out walking corn. I'm like, oh shoot. So
when it gets this kind of weather, you
Oh,
almost expect
well,
it's coming sooner
yeah,
or later.
but yeah, I mean it's dried up already. I mean there's nothing left.
So I went out the house, my complex was getting
Yeah,
dark,
that's
went
where
out of the house,
septic
went into
sits.
another structure,
Kind of
and it was
here.
only there just for, I don't know, 5 minutes. And I walked back out, everything's wet. But it's dry.
Yeah.
outside, you know?
It
Station.
is humid. It is really humid.
Yeah, a lot of the water in the fields is evaporating
Yeah.
pretty fast, I noticed.
There's still ponds. You go south of Frankfurt,
Yeah.
stuff's
Oh, yeah.
really hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, Kempton, yeah.
Oh,
All the way to Sheridan, I still see ponds.
Oh, it's awful.
Places, yeah. I noticed a lot of the cornfields you can see through the field.
A lot of variation in height and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, variation in height,
Yeah.
color change a little bit.
Yeah, some of it looks like crap.
Yeah. So,
It really
some
does.
of it ain't even there.
No, it's sad.
Do you think it'll make
Some areas, no. No, I mean, no, there's a lot of people that haven't gotten all their nitrogen put on. I mean, post spraying, I mean, corn and beans, mainly corn before it gets to be, it grows so fast with this heat.
I heard one farmer say that it wasn't him, but another man that didn't have all his corn in. Like
Well, I've got a guy I gotta
1,000
take
acres.
replant to tomorrow. I mean, they planted it, but it's just replant 'cause it's drowned out. But no, most people around here are done. There's just so many wet holes. They don't to replant or not to replant. Depends if you run over beans or corn to get to those wet holes, or if they're on the front of the field. I mean, there's just
Yeah.
you might do more harm than good to try to replant it.
One shrub.
You know, you don't even have to farm to realize how annoying that is, right? I mean, you work so hard
Well,
to
you
get
put
stuff in and,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's thousands and thousands of dollars out there just sitting in the water, underwater. Yeah, it's awful.
Two shade.
Adds a lot of unwanted stress.
As you go out Michigan Town Blacktop towards Michigan.
Yep.
The little area between the railroad tracks, there's a section out there that, I mean, it literally was a lake.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they haven't opened some kind of a drainage underneath that. I think back towards town,
I'll check to make sure this is
they
clear to you
did do
guys.
that as
That's
a
what I
portion.
agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I'm gonna apologize, because I realized after I drew the first section that I was making it harder than it needed to be. Made it clearer down here, but drawn from above, north, obviously not to scale, but you got your parking lot, your new building, your old building, pond, solar panels, septic. So I just kind of, I guess I should write display area there. But I just indicated up here, along here, we've got a space for 2 shade trees, 4 evergreens, and 1 shrub. Here's a space where we need 2 shade, 4 evergreen, and 2 shrubs. And then, before I figured out I needed to draw it differently, we have 1 shade, 2 evergreen, and 1 shrub just crunched into that little spot there. And if that seems clear to you, I can show it to him and see if that's amenable.
It's fine with me.
What's this, okay?
1 shade tree, 2 evergreens, 1 shrub. I tried to like,
Where's the signage going?
they have existing signs, I'm not
Yeah.
sure exactly how those align, they're somewhere in here, in
Is your
front of the
sign
parking
staying
lot.
put?
Signs will stay put, and we're actually adding additional signage.
Okay.
I guess I would note you, depending on what you're doing, because I think you already have 2 freestanding signs, don't you? Yeah, so there's only allowed to be 1 freestanding sign per parcel. So if you're adding more, you're probably, we're gonna need to look at that. You may be back here on the signage, depending on what you're doing.
That's just what we want.
Getting
Sorry, had we known, we would have like put it with
we've
this
picked
hearing.
up another line, and that sign is on the way. Now, I don't know if that's freestanding, I don't know if that will go on the building, but there is another
If it's
sign. That's
building
part of the
mounted, then
contract.
you probably be fine. You can have 4 square foot of building mounted signage for every 1 linear foot of building frontage. Your building is massive. So unless your sign is like totally ridiculous, I'm gonna guess building mounted is probably gonna be fine. But freestanding, the ordinance only allows 1 freestanding double face sign per parcel, with up to 100 square footage signage on each side of that sign. So you're already in excess of what that allows, so another freestanding sign would definitely.
We'll see when it shows up. You may be hearing from me again.
So I'm assuming, is this a corporate store?
So it's a family-owned corporation. There's 6 dealerships through Central and North Central and
Okay.
New Holland dealerships.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's what I
So it's
drew
not
in an effort
New
to
Holland,
somehow
it's not
quantify
a
this.
store.
So here's your parking,
Family run.
new building,
They have a
old
really
building,
big store up by
septic,
Rochester.
solar panels
It's a really,
on.
really nice store, really well kept up,
display
right before
area.
you get into the town.
So up here, I kind of drew a line,
Yeah, it's
2
very-
shade, 4 evergreen, 1 shrub.
Rochester,
along that
right before you
area.
get to
Yeah.
Rochester.
And then up in
Actually, I
this
think
area,
It's
2
big.
shade,
They
4
do a lot of
evergreen, 2
business.
shrubs. And then, this was my.
But yeah,
next
it's
one,
not
I
a
realized I was making it
Reynolds,
too small.
like a
That
John
says 1
Deere,
shade
it's not
tree, 2
corporate
evergreen,
like
and 1
that.
shrub, on that corner.
Or even True Land out here
seem clear
at
enough?
Frankfurt, that would be, I would be
Alright.
that corporate, because you've got that in multiple states,
I'm good.
so.
Neil, you're good, okay. So,
I'll
so
get
this
it.
is exhibit, right?
Exhibit
Exhibit
A.
All right. So let's just read the recommendations, make sure that you're in agreement with that. Staff recommends to approve a partial variance on the south from the front corner of the building, leave it on the entire storefront open. And on the west side, from the southwest corner of the front to the solar field, the front of the solar field, leaving only the solar panels open, but the plantings must be placed from the rear of the solar field, the remaining length of the west side.
I think, I would simplify that motion to
Okay.
just say that you're approving a partial variance to have him install buffer yards as shown in Exhibit A.
Okay. That's what's, well, I'm gonna be on it.
We sure got fancy with it,
Yeah.
didn't we?
Well, this situation is kind of unusual, because most of the time, like, we work out agreement ahead of time, so you guys actually have what everybody's, this was just a case where, you know, there's nothing wrong with them asking, but like what they asked for and where staff was different, so we didn't
So-
have a plan of consensus.
So I'm gonna, the conditions would start back up again where it says, also as proposed by the petitioner, landscaping along the new building must be installed in exchange for not placing a buffer yard in front of the building. Is that true? And the north and east sides can remain without
Yes.
buffer yards with an administrative waiver of 50%.
Yes.
And you incorporated exhibit.
Okay, so I got, yep, exhibit A. All right. Staff, so I will make a motion to approve application number 2020, CC-2025-00453, docket number 13-25-VA. According to the findings of the staff report, which were incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions, that there would be a partial variance in accordance with Exhibit A. Also, as proposed by the petitioner, landscaping along the new building must be installed in exchange for not placing any buffer yard in front of the building. The north and east sides can remain without buffer yards per the administrative waiver of 50%.
I'll second.
Okay, that was Chester and Grant.
Yeah. Roll call vote when you're done, please.
Yeah, you're just gonna have to give me a half a second.
No, you're good.
And then I'm gonna read it back to you guys, just to make sure.
I will give that back to Liz, so she got it. Please forgive me
All
for
right.
calling you Nate.
So that's a motion to approve, subject to the findings in the staff report incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions that the buffer yards that remain not granted a variance are installed per Exhibit A. 2, the landscaping for the building as proposed by the petitioner is placed, and 3, that the north and east sides remain administratively waived. Grant Moeller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hutzensberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Granted. Okay, so we can get you a copy of that exhibit, tomorrow.
That's exactly what I need.
Yeah. It's gonna go with us tonight, but we
Okay,
can
no,
get you a
that's
copy.
fine. Just let me know and send it to me and we'll make it happen. Okay?
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil.
You about said Nathan.
Please don't call me Shirley.
Once I had some-
What movie was that? It was,
I can't remember.
maybe that was Airplane.
That's a great movie.
Shirley, please don't call me Shirley.
Bind these kids.
Are you ready now?
Yeah.
This is part comedy.
Okay, I'm
Makes
good.
mine seem like a piece of cake.
So,
Hopefully.
Probably will be.
No landscaping.
so our next public hearing is application CC-2025-00496, docket number 14.
You've got a waiver filing deadline you need to deal with first?
I didn't even see it. I
And
was
that's
skip-
the, both of these.
Both of them?
But
Okay.
they're
They're-
the,
yeah, both the same.
petition.
Okay,
Yep.
so we, filing deadline waiver for 19 days for both applications for the same petitioner, Christian Smith, which is docket CC-2025-00496, docket 14-25-SE, and then application CC-2025-00497, docket 15-25-VA.
I would make a motion to waiver the deadline for those applications
Second.
for filing.
Does Scott make sense?
Yes. And then roll call vote, please.
Grant Moeller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo?
Yes.
Scott Hutzensberger?
Yes.
Chester Bankus?
Yes.
All right, filing deadline waived. Now you can.
Okay, now we'll move on to the first application, which is number CC-2025-00496, docket number 14-25-SE, petition of Christian Smith. Can you take us through that, please?
I can. So, I know sometimes it's confusing how we divide up different requests in different situations. In this particular situation, we have a special exception request and we separately have a variance request. And it is possible to grant either one of these and deny the other one. They're not interrelated on each other necessarily. So that's why we did not do a combined staff report in this case. We kept them as two completely separate items. So this one is a request for a special exception for a contractor's business, use 9.36 in the agricultural zoning district. This property is zoned agriculturally. There's some ag around them on several sides, and then to the west there's a little bit of general business. This is the intersection of State Road 52 and Colfax-Manson Road, or Manson-Colfax, depending on which end of it you're on. It's kind of an odd zoning area. There's some, there used to be some different uses there that aren't there anymore, and the zoning map hasn't really been cleaned up, so you'll actually see a little bit of industrial in there as well. So this particular petition site is about 3/4 of an acre. It's on the east side of 52. Sits between 800 West and Manson-Colfax Road in Section 4 of Perry Township. The petitioner would like to build a new pole barn for personal storage
but he'd also like it to be capable of storing equipment and materials for his contractor's business. And he has a well digging contractor's business, and I'll actually tell you, Kat's talked with him mostly, but I was actually glad when I reviewed the staff report to see this one, because I live near here and I noticed there was a business that wasn't legal, and I was just waiting for the complaint to come in. So I was actually really glad to see it coming through for requests to get sorted out. Because it's always better to have something be above board and the owner have confidence and us know that it's not sitting out there waiting for us to have to be the bad guys. So as part of this pole barn conversation, the contractor's business came into it as well. And in the A1 district, a special exception approval is required for that. There's separately, when we talk about it, the variance for the pole barn, that involves its height, because it's not an accessory structure for agricultural uses. But like I stated, those two requests are independent of each other. Right now, this business does not plan to have any kind of employees or the public entering. It would purely be for him to be able to store his equipment that he then goes out and digs wells at other sites. So right now, you're not necessarily involving the state, but we did, as always, include a clause that if in the future there's offices there or there's employees or the public's entering and exiting, then the state would have to do a review on the structure as well. On the second page is a picture where you can see the petitioner's house. The property is very well kept, and a basic site plan showing you where he wants to place that building to the side of the house. There's a series of findings that we need to examine for special exceptions. First, the proposed use conforms the district provisions in which it will be located and the general regulations of the ordinance. So this is use 9.36 on table A under section 9, which is your personal, professional, and repair services. And it does require a special exception. There's no additional development standards for the specific use, but it will be subject to the general standards of the ordinance, such as buffer yards that we just all discussed that to death on a different site. Lighting, signage, exterior grounds being kept clean and free of junk or debris, which this site hasn't had issues with that, but we always include that with any kind of use that involves a contractor. Materials and equipment cannot be stored out in the open. They need to be either inside a building or behind complete screening so they're not visible from the road or neighboring properties. It appears the findings would be met based on what we understand of his business. 2, the proposed use shall not involve an element or cause a condition that may be dangerous, injurious, or noxious to any other property or persons, and shall comply with the performance standards herein. So, as noted, when the petitioner contacted Area Plan last year, he wasn't sure that he might have some different equipment that he might keep there, but since then he's changed his plan. He's just basically having a truck and trailer there right now, but he'd like to put him in the pole barn he proposes to build. And wants to avoid finding himself in violation in the future, so he decided to go ahead and file the special exception and follow the ordinance and not wait for there to be a complaint. And I guess I would note, we have not received any complaints about any of his activities with his business parking his equipment there, creating issues for neighbors. So obviously we have nobody who's responded to the notification by contacting us. He does conduct some of his office paperwork himself, but he doesn't have any employees. Of course, the building will have to follow local permitting procedures, and if his plan changes to where a state design release is needed, that'll kick in. There doesn't seem to be any indication there'd be an injurious condition created. 3, the proposed use shall be sited, oriented, and landscaped so the relationship of its buildings and grounds to adjacent buildings and properties does not impair health, safety, or comfort, nor adversely affect values of adjacent properties. So the business building will be a new pole barn. Signage will be allowed in accordance with the ordinance, but other than that, the property would remain rural residential in appearance. A pole barn is consistent with ag and rural residential appearances, and the proposed use would not appear to affect adjacent property values. 4, the proposed use shall produce a total environmental effect consistent with and not harmful to the environment of the neighborhood. So this is a well digging business, so the equipment and materials with that business would need to be inside or screened off so they're out of the public's view. The property appearance would remain consistent with a rural and agricultural neighborhood. It would just look like an existing house and a new pole barn next to it. 5, that the proposed use organizes vehicular access and parking to minimize conflicting traffic movement. There's currently a U-shaped driveway with 2 accesses to the dwelling from Highway 52. The petitioner has not indicated that he's planning to ask NDOT for additional curb cuts, although I doubt that NDOT would grant more. In fact, sometimes we discover with these that the U-drive isn't approved and one access has to go. Staff did reach out to NDOT about the request, but have we heard from them since then? No, we haven't heard anything back from NDOT, so certainly when we get to permitting, he's gonna have to check with NDOT
So if something comes up there, but NDOT didn't reach back out to us screaming about anything, so we don't have any reason to expect that there's some, huge issue that he can't address in the permitting process. Finally, the proposed use shall promote the objectives of the ordinance and be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So Land Use 3, Objective 2 of the comp plan states to prevent incompatible land uses from located in ag areas that may encroach on confined feeding and farming. And then we also have Land Use 4, Goal 4, Objective 5, which states to encourage businesses that are compatible with agriculturally zoned land. So both of those objectives kind of state similar things from opposite directions. And a well digging business, well not strictly agriculturally based, it does have some similarities, and certainly every farmer and every house needs a well unless they're on city water. So it's not something that's completely out of line with what you'd seen in ag or conflicting with it. So a well digging business would appear to meet that general measure. And in conclusion, the staff would recommend to approve the special exception request with kind of our standard conditions when we deal with these, that there be no accumulation of junk and debris on the exterior grounds, that equipment and materials be inside or screened so they're not visible from roads or neighboring properties. And then just because right now it's not in the plans, noting that an existing office, if it were to be added, has to meet building codes. And then that this has to share the existing residential drive. We're not talking about additional curb cuts. And finally, that the special exception is granted to this petitioner in this location only. So typically, this kind of special exception would run with the land. So if the house was sold and somebody who bought it wanted to continue running a well business there, they would be able to continue doing that. But given the residential nature of this house and the fact that the way he maintains it is part of why staff feels this isn't a problem in this location, staff thinks this should be limited to only this owner in this location. And if he wishes to sell it to somebody else who's going to continue running a well digging business there, they need to come back to the BZA to talk about how they plan to maintain that. Likewise, if he moves to a different site, the ordinance would already require that, but he would need to come back for a new approval at his new site when he changes locations. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but as long as you don't change any of them, you can just reference the staff report.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, sir? Would you mind going to the microphone? Just state your name and please.
Christian Smith, and the business I run is not actually well drilling. I'm a licensed well pump installer, so I don't have a big drill rig and things out there. And I operate out of a single van and then a pickup truck with a trailer. So it's just a small family owned. Myself and my son do it. And then we also do plumbing service too. So I would ultimately like to expand and maybe take on a couple more employees in the future, but that's not in the cards right now. Right now it's just myself and my son, but I'm getting older and it's getting harder for me to get around, so eventually I would like to have an employee, but I do run the office is actually in my house. And it wouldn't be moving out to the barn or anything. That's more for, right now I have a 2-car garage that my wife can't park her car in, and it's full of lawnmower and just all kinds of stuff, Christmas decorations, whatnot. All that needs to go out so she can park her car in there. And then I'd like to put my mower and of course truck trailer and a boat out in the barn. And that's one of the reasons that I needed the extra height, was because the boat is kind of tall. It's a pontoon boat that sits up on its pontoon, so.
Which will be the next application.
Okay.
And I would note, because he's asking for a contractor's business, not a home occupation, there is no requirement that he move everything out to the pole building or that it be in a specific spot. And the way we phrase the conditions, he would not have to come back to the board if he hired an employee, but he would have to come through us to deal with additional permitting and the state approvals when he got to that point, so.
Okay.
So your business is you would replace existing pumps, is that right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
But I puzzled over why you didn't need a well drilling rig when I was reading.
Yeah,
this. thought,
I just
well,
have a
maybe
little
you store it
tiny
somewhere
pump
else.
pulling machine that fits on my 6x12 trailer, so.
So the guys digging the wells typically put the pumps in, right?
Well, typically, yeah, and then I go save old wells.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So when their pumps fail or pressure tanks or stuff, I replace components.
I got you.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I do occasionally dig up well casings and things like that, but I rent equipment to do that. That way I don't have to pay for them and maintain them. So. yeah.
Okay. You guys have any questions for Christian?
I think it's,
'Cause I think it's pretty
yep,
clear.
This is straightforward.
Okay.
Appreciate all the work that staff does to get the staff reports done.
Okay.
So, we ready?
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve application number CC-2025-00496, docket number 14-25SE, according to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated by reference in the motion by reference.
And I'll second.
With the conditions,
Thought he was.
Noted in.
with the conditions. Is that good enough, say noted
I
in
would
the
say,
staff
we-
report?
yes,
Okay,
yep, you just
there you
want
go.
tied in.
All right, there you go, that's it.
And I'll second. Roll call vote, or when you get a chance. You can sit down, sir, if you'd like. Sorry.
That's okay.
Fair.
It's hard for me
Where's my
to sit
second?
for too long. I've had back surgery. so
Okay.
Standing up's kinda nice.
So that's a motion to approve, subject to the findings in the staff report incorporated by reference with the conditions noted in the staff report. Grant Mueller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hutzinsberger,
Yes.
Chester Bankus.
Yes.
Okay, so 4-0.
Okay, so then our next application is application number CC-2025-00497, docket number 15-25-VA. It is also the petition of Christian Smith, requesting a variance. Can you take us through that, please?
I can. I'm gonna save us the location information,
Okay.
because I'm gonna assume everybody can track that from one to the next. So I'm just gonna focus in on, this particular request, which is a variance, to waive the regulations in, UDO 307, specifically regarding height, which, they require that an accessory structure may not exceed the height of the primary structure. We used to have just a set height for accessory structures, and we changed that, it's probably been a decade ago now, because we were hitting so many variances for things where it was like a two-story home and somebody was just putting in something that was a short little 8-foot sidewall, but it was in excess of the, I think we allowed 12-foot high before, and so it was just very, very tight. So we haven't had nearly as many variances with this wording, but we do sometimes run into situations like this where a house is unusually short, and so they find themselves limited by what otherwise is no longer creating a problem. So the petitioner is hoping to build this building, as he noted, to be able to store a few larger items, specifically a boat, as well as the items for his now approved contractor's business. And a taller accessory structure would allow him to store the equipment for the contractor's business as well as his personal stuff without issue. If the variance is not approved, it would mostly affect the petitioner being able to store his large personal items, particularly the boat, since he's mostly storing a truck and trailer in terms of the contractor's business that probably would fit in a little bit smaller building. If he needs larger equipment for the business of the future, though, if he was denied, he'd need to come back to make that request again or find another site to use for equipment storage. Now that I know he's not a well driller, I'm much less concerned he may eventually have larger equipment. The petitioner is actually requesting a wall height of 12 foot, which is not that large of a pole building for those of us that are around them. 10 foot is a standard wall height, but then you've got your roof, and we measure from the peaks of the two buildings. So you do start to get, up there a little bit. You're probably looking, I'm gonna guess at probably roughly a 16 or 17 foot height by the time you get the roof. Do you know?
So the building was gonna be 30 foot wide, with
Okay.
a 12 foot sidewall and a 4.5 roof pitch.
Okay, all right,
I
so
think
maybe a
it
little
puts
smaller.
it at about, right at about 16 foot,
Okay.
somewhere in there, 17.
Yep. So not,
It is, I think the house is like gonna be about 2
foot
foot
shorter.
shorter than
Yeah.
the building.
and it's just that width gets you there. So, like I noted, the house is a single-story home, the roof is at a low angle, so he has a limitation that's greater than what a two-story home would be. If he was two-story, he probably wouldn't be here. So again, you can see the location of the site and the structure. There's a picture there again showing the house. You can see how flat that house is comparatively speaking. So there's three findings that have to exist to grant a variance. First, the approval will not be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. So if the application is approved, then he would be granted a variance and permitted to construct the structure that's taller than the primary structure by a few feet. The structure will have to meet required setbacks, and it should not create any visual clearance issues with traffic because it will be further back than where the existing dwelling is. Since it's only a 12-foot sidewall, I say only, this is out in an agricultural area, so that's not huge by agricultural standards. And as noted, if there was a two-story house, we wouldn't probably be having this conversation. Two, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property included in the variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner. So again, the structure will be further back than the existing house. It's adjacent to farm ground. It's going to be a pole barn style, which is what you see through most of the agricultural district, so it should mesh with the area without any adverse effect. Finally, the strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property. So the petitioner wishes to park his boat inside when he's not using it for personal storage. His primary structure does have that very low profile single-story ranch style versus a two-story home or even a split ranch where you kind of have the effect of an extra half story that would allow him to have a conforming structure. So assuming the petitioner is granted the approval, assuming he is granted, he was granted. So since he has been granted approval for his special exception request, he would not have sufficient height to store his personal items or his contractor's business equipment if in the future his equipment needs increase beyond what he already has. It's also unlikely, it does seem like a practical difficulty to require him to place a second story on his house in order to build his pole barn. So we did feel that there was a practical difficulty in this situation. Consequently, staff would recommend to approve the variance request with the condition that it's only for personal storage and, since it's approved, storage of things related to his contractor's business equipment, vehicles, and materials. No new or additional other business uses would be permitted as part of the structure approval. And again, we noted if at some point down the road his existing approved business expands to have employees or public access, then it will need state approvals.
Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add different?
I do not.
Okay. Well, pretty straightforward again.
Hey, I'm ready to go if you.
Okay,
you're ready.
go ahead.
Okay, I'd like,
Roll.
right, there you go. So I'd like to make I'd like to make a motion to approve application number. Go back to it. CC 2025-00497, docket 15-25-VA. According to the findings of the staff report, which are incorporated in the motion by reference with the conditions as noted in the staff report.
I'll second. Roll call vote, please.
Grant Muller,
Yes.
Stacy Pettigo,
Yes.
Scott Hasmansberger,
Yes.
Chester Bacon.
Yep.
All right, 4-0. So you'll be able to move on to permitting.
Cool.
And
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
very much appreciate your willingness not to push the issue on the business, but to come and get it legalized. I know it's like always one of those things like people struggle with, but we would far rather if we get a complaint now, we can just tell somebody, look, he's legal,
Right.
you know,
Yeah,
too bad,
you
you
know,
know.
when I first called about the sign thing, it seemed like, I had called NDOT, I remember right, I called county, someone in the county, I don't know, maybe it was permitting office perhaps, but then even NDOT told me, well, that's a US highway, so you have to do things their way, and then the only thing that I could find out was a 4-foot by 4-foot sign was allowed, or, you know, I thought it was, but I wasn't even aware until, getting a hold of Kat that it wasn't, so, I apologize for
No.
that. folks. I
You
didn't
can't do what
break
you
the
don't know,
rules.
but when you found out, I very much appreciate you getting
I
it taken
just
care of.
wanted to have
So-
a shingle out there on 52, and try to put bread on the table, so.
What size garage door are you putting in it?
At first I was going to go with a larger 16 wide by 10 high door, but I think it would be better, for two 10 by 10 doors in the front. And then it would have an 8-foot by 7 roll-up door in the back. so I could move my mower and stuff in and out of that.
So the 12-foot wall height will allow a 10-foot.
You bet, yeah. and
You just
then,
won't have anything up top, I'm assuming, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I did the same thing. I have an agricultural pole barn, so I don't have that same, and a two-story house, so, but,
Right,
but,
because I was
but
thinking.
I had to do a 12-foot sidewall because I did a 10-foot tall door because I needed to be able to get hay wagons in and out that were
Sure.
stacked. And that was the same thing I discovered. If I wanted a roll-up door, you have to have that extra
You bet.
distance.
Absolutely. That, I was like, I guess the only thing I could really do would be to add like a cupola to the house or something. And I really didn't want to do that.
On 52 is one of those stories, like, how did that really weird structure get there? Like, somebody's just-
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
No new business?
no new business.
Okay. Well, I will.
We did have next meeting is July 22nd, and I do have 2 filings.
Okay. Sounds good. So our next.
Here?
I don't know. I think so,
Okay.
maybe. It's a very strong possibility, I think.
Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, second.
Okay. Grant,
Yes.
I would've been glad to take it easy on the second one, but he didn't want to do anything. And it's like, if he doesn't want to do anything, well, you know, that's not where we're gonna go.
Who?
Neil did not want to do anything to the, he didn't want to, he wanted to have a full variance.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not
So-
opposed to what he wants to do. I mean,
I
I get it.
understand. I know.
I just,
So,
then I kind of think it was funny because it's kind of like, well, hey, you guys on the board, just tell me what you want and I'll do it.
yeah, well,
Well, if
your
that's the
statement,
case,
and
why
your
don't we-
statement was very,
Yeah.
was very direct and it was appropriate too. Okay, stay with the law.
Well, if you're asking us, I mean, you know.
And Liz's statement was good too, okay, if he doesn't want to agree to it, you can deny it, okay.
Building inspector,
That's
as long
gonna
as
go.
it follows what code says,